Fabulous. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure on behalf of Yorkshire Building Society to welcome you here to the conference today. It's a delight to be in Leeds and to see so many familiar faces, but also some new contacts. Before we go into the conversation, just a few introductory remarks from me. I mean, I'm really delighted to share this panel conversation because, and here in Leeds, this city that, as Miles said, exemplifies the importance of regional growth. I think this session comes at a really pivotal moment, 1 year into the government's growth agenda and the day after the budget. And it's perfect timing to reflect on progress and what more the government can do working with businesses in this room to create economic growth. As we know, economic growth is at the centre of the government's mission, and it is at the centre of government policy. And we know that our sector has a vital role in creating and supporting that growth. Miles has shared some of the important statistics that I think, as a relative newcomer even to the Leeds geography, was a surprise to me. But in the work we've done with the Yorkshire and Humber Financial Services and Skills Commission, understanding the range of roles and the range of businesses here and how critical that is, building that ecosystem to support future growth. But there are so many challenges, including the challenge of productivity. We know that our productivity continues to lag behind the G7 peers, and business investment faces global headwinds, reinforcing the need for structural reforms. And I'm sure that may be something we touch on in this conversation today. So growth and increased productivity, critical to fund public services, improve living standards, and maintain the UK's position as a leading global financial centre. And delivering this agenda, we all recognise, requires really strong partnership, and I know that that's a topic we're going to come to today. So in this conversation, we're hoping to cover a number of different aspects. We'll open up with some initial questions from the panel, and then really looking forward to hearing your questions from the room. We'll cover a little bit about the growth agenda and the sentiment, particularly maybe the sentiment after yesterday and how these incredible businesses are feeling. A little bit about the growth across the nations and regions of the UK, and again, the role that we can play. So looking forward to your contribution through the questions. And now I'm going to ask the panel to introduce themselves. So thank you, everybody. So Raoul, can I start with you?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Raoul Ruparel. I'm a senior director at Boston Consulting Group, and I lead our economics work in the UK. And in a past life, spent 3 years in Number 10 working for Theresa May when she was PM.
So Mandy, Ridyard. I have an engineering company working in aerospace based in Bradford, which I bought in a pub when I was 26 on Christmas Eve by accident. But the reason I'm here today is I work for the Mayor, trying to translate what businesses need into policy and trying to translate what policy we have into helping business.
Hello, I'm Antony Manchester. I'm co-head of Government Affairs and Public Policy for the region at BlackRock. BlackRock's, I think, now the country's largest asset manager. We manage the assets of about 13 million people in the UK who are saving for retirement or for a rainy day, etc. And we're a big investor and supporter in the UK, employing about 5,000 people in London, Edinburgh and Birmingham.
And I'm Myhill for Aon, the global risk and professional services consultancy, where I'm working as the Director of Public Affairs for the UK and EMEA, so looking at our advocacy across the various regional hubs where we have operations.
Fantastic. So a wide range of different perspectives, I'm sure, around this panel. So let me start with a very broad question, I guess. So here we are, 16 months from the general election and barely 16 hours since the budget, maybe a little bit longer since it became known what was in the budget. I wondered if we could start with a question about how you all feel right now. What's the sentiment in your organisations about growth? Growth for your organisation, for the sector, and for the UK as a whole. And I know you'll have some very different perspectives from your different sectors. But let me start with you, Raoul, because I think you can also give us that broader perspective in the UK, given the role that you fulfil.
Sure, yeah, happy to. I mean, yeah, it was a somewhat chaotic few weeks and chaotic day yesterday, sort of the culmination of this budget process. Look, I think maybe talk a bit about that and then the medium longer term. I think in the short term, the outlook is sort of mixed. The budget yesterday is sort of focused on fiscal consolidation and pulling back a little bit and trying to reassure markets and also reassure Labour MPs. So I think it probably just about achieved that. But in the short term, I think it does put downward pressure on consumer spending with some of those tax rises coming through. It also does put pressure on, I think, business investment in terms of the latest forecasts. It suggests that margins are going to continue to be squeezed and that businesses are going to continue to keep investment pretty flat over the coming years. So that is something we need to see pick up. So is not especially positive. I mean, all that being said, I think when you look at the growth forecasts and our outlook, relative to peers, actually the UK is not in a bad place in the next few years. We have solid, if unspectacular growth, but sort of around 1.5%, a bit above, bit below. So it's not terrible in terms of that short-term perspective, but I think the budget yesterday was not massively focused on shifting the growth outlook. That brings me to kind of the medium to longer term, I guess, where, stepping back, as you say, we're 16 months in from a government where growth is, supposedly the core mission and the main mission. And I'm not sure that anyone who listened to the budget yesterday would have really felt that come through that strongly. There has been a shift in narrative towards more the kind of cost of living to focus on the NHS and to focus on bringing debt down. Now, all valid and very important aims, but I think, the sense of growth being core and the primary mission didn't come through as strongly as maybe it has previously, and I think that maybe signals a bit of a concern of it falling down the pecking order. And I think in terms of the broader structural challenge that both you and Miles hinted at, in terms of the UK economy, lagging productivity growth, a lack of investment, it's not clear to me yet that we're really seeing a major headway or measures to tackle those challenges. I think, though, putting the optimistic side of it, we are quite far behind France and Germany in productivity, 10 to 15% below, 30% below the US. It's not inherent that should be the case. And so I think there is an opportunity for kind of catch up and hopefully some relatively low-hanging fruit in terms of reforms. And there are things that we can do in terms of scaling, just innovations that we see elsewhere or in some of our leading companies that we're not yet great at diffusing across the economy. So, look, all in all, I think the budget in the short term has not made a massive difference and didn't necessarily try to make a massive difference to growth. I think the challenges are ones we know about and which there are some measures to address, but I would like to see more and faster action and more focus on that over the coming months and years to really try and shift the dial. But all in all, we're not in a terrible place, but I don't think we're yet tackling those big issues that are at the heart of our economy.
Brilliant. So I'm sure we're going to come back to some of those points too, and maybe the role that we can play as businesses in trying to move some of those on. But I don't want to go creeping deaf. But Mandy, should we come to you next and just maybe get your perspective on how does it feel in terms of growth? What's your view now? More optimistic or less?
So with my own business, I work in aerospace, and to mention the dreaded P word, during the pandemic, which was a 3-year pandemic for aerospace because China didn't open its doors to transatlantic travel or to global travel until January 2023. It was a very difficult place. The rebound in the aerospace industry is dramatic, which is what we expected it would be. So from the problems of no demand to the problems of excess demand, it's challenging, but it's a good place to be. So I see growth in front of me as a manufacturer. Then there are challenges in the UK around supporting that growth in terms of cost pressures. So especially being competitive on a global stage with the cost of energy here and the cost of skills here. So those two things make it difficult. And to put that into context, I think it is about 7 pence a kilowatt in Seattle, where I compete, and it's 24 pence a kilowatt in Bradford. For an aerospace engineer in Bangalore, it's about £16,000, and in Bradford, it's about £70,000. So to be competitive, I have to be able to invest in my people, in my technology, and my processes. From a regional perspective, all of the regions were challenged to put their growth plans together, and I'm pleased to say that I think West Yorkshire was first past the post on that because we were already doing that job. Now, I often look to Beyoncé in challenging times, and Beyoncé once asked who rules the world. And I don't think we quite know the answer to that geopolitically at the moment, but as she's a very astute businesswoman, what she does know is that you need a plan. And so having a plan for the region that includes infrastructure in terms of transport and housing, which makes it easier for people to get to college or get to work and to be able to live close to where they work, and I'm pleased to say that this region is ahead of the national average, are really important. And having a plan for growth for business, which is also within that plan, is really important.
Great.
So I feel positive, although if you weren't an optimist, you wouldn't be in business.
That's an interesting thought for everybody in the room. Are we optimists? Okay. Let's hear a little bit about the international perspective. Antony, maybe you'd like to share a little bit about that.
Sure, happy to. We think the UK is an excellent place to invest, right? So, we just heard from our entrepreneur with one of many brilliant companies that are very investable. And when we look at across the piece internationally, we see that UK equities are outperforming European ones and have done relative to their peers. The UK is relatively shielded from some of the trade tensions because of the degree of the extent to which services dominate the economy. And we see the UK having natural strengths in some of the buzzier areas that are driving growth across the world, like advanced manufacturing, artificial intelligence, and big data. So there's a lot going on, and we're deploying a lot of capital to the UK because we see those long-term opportunities. And there are also some really quite significant mega forces, as unfortunately we call them, that are driving, that are going to be positive for the UK around the energy transition and the move to AI and data. And those two things align quite well because the UK is a good place and is already well ahead of other parts of the world in the amount of energy that does come from renewable sources, which we're going to need more of to take advantage of the AI revolution. So that makes a lot of sense to us. I think looking back overnight at the budget, though, I agree with what Raoul said in terms of it was okay. It seems to have assuaged market concerns. I think you're right to say that it has. The Chancellor has done a good balancing act between keeping markets, backbenchers, and the general public happy. But within that sort of triangle, there doesn't seem to be as much talk about growth as there has been in the past. And I think that's the sort of concern going forwards, is where is that growth going to come from, and what are we going to do about short-term energy prices? The long-term picture for the UK looks very good, but in the short term, as Mandy's just said, energy prices are very, very high. We've got problems with access to skills, and we've got, maybe we can go on to this later on, problems around innovation as well, because companies don't seem to be investing to innovate, and that's what's going to drive productivity and growth in the longer term. So the picture's not at all bad by any means, and I think we talk the country, collectively, we Brits talk the country down a lot. Actually, there's a lot of positivity there. The question, though, is a little bit more concerning around the longer term in terms of where growth is going to come from.
Really thoughtful. Thank you so much. And let's just hear then, lastly, from Andrew. How are you feeling today, Andrew? And how's the last year been?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and I agree with my fellow panelists on the sort of the broader scope and prospects for the UK economy and the signs that are coming out. I think if I look at it from an Aon perspective, and more broadly from an insurance and risk advisory perspective, which I think is often the unsung hero of the UK, not just the specialty sort of markets down in London, but also more broadly in the regional piece. Uncertainty, challenge, and these are things. These are opportunities to thrive as well, where no one does it better than us in the UK in terms of that and having that capacity. And so, while the sort of the domestic piece looks relatively stable, and I think some of the indicators are good, as my fellow panelists have said, it's the international piece that is really a huge opportunity for us to kind of bring in. And as Mandy said, we live in interesting times, and if you're looking at that broader geopolitical piece and how the world is responding to these sort of global challenges, there are huge opportunities for us in the UK to bring in and contextualize, bring capital to bear on different problems, as we see, right across the piece. Governments are facing challenges on spending. The state is receding, and the private sector, international finance, needs to come in to fill that gap. And so, there's huge opportunities for sort of innovation and expansion there, if the framework is right. And the UK is still a great place to do business.
definitely got some optimists in this panel, haven't we? Look, let's move on from that to thinking about that is actually quite encouraging that each of you are seeing some potential, and I think, Raoul, is sort of, as you say, nothing too disastrous from yesterday. But there is, as you say, this question about how central is growth really. And Mandy, I'd love to come to you because in your role, I mean, you're spanning both business and into local government. And I'd really like your perspectives on what needs to be done to encourage growth across the UK, especially in thriving hubs like Leeds. But maybe we can also move on to what's the balance of responsibility, do you think, between sort of national government, local government and businesses? Because I don't know if we have an unrealistic expectation of what can be achieved, and maybe we need to lean in more ourselves. So quite a few things in there, but maybe start a little bit with your own perspective on what more needs to be done, and then where can we look to for some of those solutions?
Okay, well, I guess as a business, you don't really think about political boundaries. So even though money is devolved around political boundaries, as a business, I'm a business that's based in Bradford, but it's really about a global business that I talk. But when I'm working with a combined authority, I try and put everything from a business perspective. So one of the things that I've helped to design is the Wheel of Enterprise, and that looks at the 6 main levers that a business can look to, and where maybe business support could help, or connections or networks could help. And those sit around the levers of, first of all, access to place. So what has a place got in terms of the ability to provide wet labs or co-working spaces or factory environments and investable opportunities? And that's something that's within our growth plan. But also, what's the planning like in terms of extending those things? And we know there are challenges around that. Secondly, access to finance and investment. How do we increase that access to finance and investment for companies? Startups, but especially scale-ups. I think that's really going to be critical to any growth agenda that we have. And that's particularly important for founders that are female, for example, where we know that there is an issue with accessing finance, and certainly in the regions we know that there are bigger issues with accessing investment. Thirdly, access to skills and know-how. So how do we get more skills in the region? How do we hold on to the talent? But also, how do we help people to understand how to do things? So how to export, how to start a business. Fourthly, access to markets and supply chains. So how do we connect businesses to markets, and how do we help them with supply chains? As a business, those are things that I'm looking at. Next on the line, access to networks. Mm-hmm. So lots of companies don't have those networks, don't know where the ecosystem is, don't know how to find their way around it. And that's particularly important if you're further away from networks. So some communities or women often don't have the networks that maybe others have because they're a member of the golf club or they go to the football or something similar. And then finally, you mentioned access to innovation. So how do we look at that from a business perspective? Now, what role does regional government play around that? Well, the way that if we put business in the centre of that wheel and we put regional government around it, regional government does lots of things that businesses want. So it increases the housing stock. It should be solving the transport problem, which is especially acute in this region. It also provides business support. It does things we don't like so much. So it holds up planning and it makes us pay more rates, which after yesterday's budget might be a challenge for some sectors. And then national government, what role does it have to play? Well, as a business, I generally don't want more legislation, taxation, or regulation around me because it costs money. It probably fuels the financial and professional services market because I'm going for advice all the time, but it doesn't help my margin. But it also does things that I like. So it helps create trade deals, and it helps provide devolved budgets that support all of those access sort of levers that I need. So it's those sorts of things that I look at from a how does the business see what regional government does and what national government does, and then translates where regional government might start to help connect and join those dots for businesses to grow further and faster. I don't know if that answers your question. But.
Well, it gives us. I think it gives us a sense, because I do think when we think about growth, there is. I suppose sometimes we have an unrealistic expectation, I would argue, that of what government can do. There's some things they can do to create the right environment. But actually, I think there's a lot that we need to do. And I think in Leeds, having the access to work with the local authority, with the Leeds City Council to drive this growth is actually, I think it's been one of the reasons why we've seen the success in Leeds. And I just wonder how much more we could do working together. I mean, maybe Raoul, you were nodding a little bit. What do you see as the responsibility of business, us businesses in the room, and where do you look to government to support?
Yeah, look, I think it definitely is a joint enterprise, right? It's not something, government has some levers, but they can't solve this picture entirely. So it definitely needs to come from both. And I think it is amazing, having worked on both sides, how much the two sides talk past each other and how little they understand. I mean, it's just picking up on a point Mandy touched upon. Like when you're in government, people think of regulation and legislation and taxation in, well, this is what my department does and this is what this department does. But as a business, you don't care. You just see the government and you see the whole book together. And so, I mean, thinking in a slightly more business and consumer-centric way would be a good start, and that's something I think that business should continue to push the government to do. I mean, look, there's a few things that maybe just to pick up again on a couple of points that Mandy mentioned. Investment, infrastructure, connectivity is a massive one that we do very poorly in the UK as a whole. But I think there are government pieces around the planning, and there's some progress being made there. I think they need to go further and faster. But I think from a business perspective as well, the way we deliver infrastructure projects is sort of almost fundamentally flawed in the UK. We did a study last year, and the UK has both the highest cost and the longest time to delivery amongst all of our peers when it comes to infrastructure projects. And that's not just down to government, that's down to how we approach different phases of infrastructure projects, and particularly a kind of endemic risk aversion we have across the piece. And I think that's sort of a cultural thing almost that businesses as well need to get a bit more comfortable taking some of that risk and approaching it in a kind of slightly different way. And then I think there's a big piece on skills and kind of diffusion and the network point as well that Mandy touched on. So, for example, in the EU now, the average firm invests twice what a UK firm does in training, which is a pretty stark stat. And so we are falling behind in terms of the amount we invest in training and skills particularly for our existing workforce. And on the cusp of AI coming in, that is going to become ever more important. And so I think thinking how we can train people up, retrain them as we see some of the changes coming from AI will be very important. And I think there's also a government piece when it comes to skills. And I think there's a real question of, do we have the right labour market set up and right kind of flexibility? We saw again yesterday a further increase in national living wage. I think it's now 60+% of the median wage in the UK, which is high, and does that hamper kind of hiring of younger workers in particular? And then what can we do in terms of the type of flexibility we need in the labour market? We always talk about how the UK does have a very flexible labour market, and in some ways we do in terms of flexibility of contracts, hours works, salary. But when it comes to people moving between firms, between sectors around the country, we really don't have a particularly flexible labour market. So what more can we do to support that? So yeah, a few things there, but I definitely think it is a joint endeavour from business and government. And I think, sort of seeing the iterative process of how we make policy as a more joint discussion is important. Having worked in government, quite often government sees policy making as the thing we do, and then we'll go and just say we've spoken to business about it, and it's kind of a box-ticking exercise. That's not particularly helpful. From the business side, when they get in a room with a government minister, it's all about lobbying for their specific thing, rather than let's maybe have a broader conversation about how do we actually make policy. So I think there are things both sides can do better there as well.
Can I come back on something?
Of course.
Well, I think one of the things government might consider, you mentioned innovation earlier, is how it's chasing innovation. So at the moment, there's an awful lot of chasing unicorns and about product innovation. But if you look at the changes to the R&D tax credit, especially for SMEs, and you look at the changes to Innovate UK, the way the funding will be spent, there's less about process innovation, so translating that. So instead of chasing unicorns, should we be chasing scale-ups? So backing more racehorses that are on an efficiency journey to compete on an international stage, rather than always chasing the latest thing. We need to do both.
Yeah. And what about that investment in individuals and skills growth? Do you think there's enough for businesses, small and medium, to really help them to invest more in that skills growth?
Well, it's really difficult as a business. So as a business, if I want to buy a new piece of equipment, it's very easy for me to get asset finance. But if I want to go through a business transformation that includes a people agenda, there is very little I can't get any finance to help me. So when you look at what a business might do, it will tend to buy technology, but maybe not put the training alongside it to make the most of that technology. And how can we help businesses to fund that better?
Great. I mean, I'm looking at two gentlemen at the end, both very interesting businesses in this space. So
Yeah, I mean, I
please
think
come in.
I'd agree with all those points. I think there's something to overlay there. There's a tendency, I think, at these points to often come to government with a shopping list of we need this and we need that and all these things. I think there is also a point, and we hear it from our clients as well, that consistency matters. So when the policy direction is clear, when it's durable, capital flows. Capital follows that consistency and that durability. And so I think there's an inflection point here to say, and these last few weeks haven't necessarily been the best example of consistency or durability on government sort of policy and sort of how this budget process has evolved. But I think there is a case now for central government to say, this is the sail we've set, this is the course we're charting, and allow the private sector, allow businesses to coalesce around that with some sort of consistency. And look, a really great example is around what's been done with the metro mayors and regional growth and Northern Powerhouse and things like that, where we've seen that as a policy and that as an effort that has flowed across governments of different colours. And we are seeing the benefits of that come to fruition now and the delivery of it.
Great. Well, look, that's actually a great question, or a great comment, rather, to lead us into the rest of the questions. I would just encourage you all. We'll come to hands in the room in a moment if there are any hands in the room, but if you want to add a question on the app, then please do. We have a question from Maximilian Ashwandan, and I'm going to come to you, Antony, on this one first of all, but it picks up some of the themes we've been talking about. How can we encourage government to think beyond election cycles and to promote real long-term growth from the industry? So that point of consistency that you just made. So what do we think we can do to help government think beyond election cycles?
Well, it's a really great question. Actually, it follows on from a lot of what's just been said in terms of how government at the national, regional, local level and private sector can all partner with each other. The UK's policy problem fundamentally is one of misalignment. Right, so as Andrew just said, there's plenty of capital. There's plenty of capital in the financial system, in building societies, in banks and institutions, and there's plenty of businesses that want it. And that capital will flow if the channel is direct and there aren't too many hitches in it. But the problem is there's too many misalignments throughout that channel, and government has a key role to play in aligning all of those bits so the channel of money will line up. But at the moment, doesn't seem to be doing so. And maybe that's because there are too many different branches of government, too many elements of it that they're all doing their own thing. So to sort of Mandy's point about accessing finance, in the UK, there are over, and if you go on the for the Department for Business website, there are 128 different bodies at local, regional, national level to help and support businesses. So I mean, how can anyone understand what this smorgasbord of different bodies is there to do? Whereas in the US, there's just one simple agency called the Small Business Agency, and that gives people advice, it gives businesses access to procurement opportunities, and it gives them access to capital where government's got that, Whereas here in the UK, we've got that massive number of them, and then we've got multiple public finance institutions as well. So the British Business Bank, the National Wealth Fund, and the Infrastructure Bank. And again, are these aligned to get investment going? So the British Business Bank is doing an amazing role and is gearing, and is actually crowding in a lot of significant investment. But the National Wealth Fund could probably do more if it was more open to the pricing needs of insurance and big institutions, because they're there, it's competing with gilts for investment, and you don't see that alignment. Similarly, if you want to invest in infrastructure, you've got to make sure that the planning system is working and will release money. You've got to make sure that economic regulation is there, and you've got to have the co-financing. But until all of these things line up, the flow of the from A to B is gummed up and it's slightly disjointed, and it won't take too long to just nudge it into place. But I think, to answer the question, that's what government can do, and that's what the opportunity of this industrial strategy is. And if central government can't or won't do it, because there are a lot of divisions within Whitehall. I mean, like Raoul, I used to work there, and I can see how difficult it's going to be to line them up. Then maybe it's the moment in time for regional government to step forward. Because you look at what's gone on in around Leeds, in Yorkshire, and Manchester as well. Been very impressive. Birmingham. There, you do seem to have people who are not stuck to this 5-year short-term cycle, which enables them to think more about the longer term. And maybe they're the people who are going to do this aligning up and aligning things so that capital can flow.
Really great. So look, let's hear Raoul, let's hear it with you from the perspective of national government, and then I'd love to hear Mandy. Sort of, are you optimistic about the role that we can play maybe in the regions in getting that lining up better? So Raoul, first of all, from national.
Yeah, I would say the other thing you can do to try and look beyond the 5-year cycle is just to actually start delivering and show some progress and show some success. And I think if you look at some of the programs that have cut across different governments and different parties, let me just take one like the offshore wind rollout and the contracts for difference, right? Started under a Labour government under Blair Brown and then ran through Cameron and really rolled out in the 2010s. And the reason why that was durable was because it was an innovative approach. It started showing success quite early. Investors liked it. The developers liked it, and so it was in the end kept on and pushed through, and also had a big strategic goal in terms of obviously growing our renewable energy supply. So that combination of a clear end goal and starting delivery and just getting something in place, right, really makes a difference. And things can be durable if you do that. I think given where we are, we're now 18 months almost into this government, and I'm not sure they have any of those real successes to show yet, and that durability of programs. So that is just a very practical kind of way. If you can get going, deliver stuff, it's much harder then to be unpicked, and it gives people certainty and clarity as well.
So that consistency and sticking to the mission, I think, is going to be a theme coming out from the conversation. So Mandy, in thinking about Leeds, and what can we learn from the successes here then? How can we look beyond this sort of cycles that we keep seeing in terms of election and think longer term? And I think there are some great examples out there in the Northern Powerhouse as well, and a number of other, Manchester, great examples of looking beyond the election cycle. What can we do more here?
I think consistency in a business or in a region or in a government really helps, because then you get that stability, which always helps businesses to grow further and faster. And having a sense of place is really important to that agenda. So the great thing about having a regional mayor with what will hopefully be a single settlement soon to enable money to be spent exactly where it's needed by the people in the region, I think helps give us that opportunity to make a difference. Right. So we're doing some great things in the region around clusters, and all of the country is talking about clusters, but understanding what the niches are within those clusters is really important. So, for example, in Manchester, they may talk about manufacturing, but it might be graphene that is really their thing. In this area, we have a huge RF cluster, so radio frequency cluster, that powers up satellite comms and all other sorts of comms here. So knowing what you've got and understanding how you can grow that quickly or bigger and better is actually absolutely what we need. But to enable us to do that, we need a plan, and that plan we need to stick with. Yeah. So my role is apolitical, and I don't get involved in party politics, but what I do like is when we have an industrial strategy or a plan that we can hang our hat on and invest in line with that.
Great. Now, there's another question in from the floor from Tom Philpott saying, how can we build greater capacity and shared expertise amongst the metro mayors and devolved nations so they are fully equipped to make use of the new powers, funds and opportunities?
So there is already a network. So the Council of Mayors and the devolved nations come together regularly. I think Tracy chairs that group. If I've got that wrong, I apologise. But that already happens. There is also a network of business board chairs and one of the chairs across the country, and we come together and talk about those things. So I think those things already exist. But obviously, the more sharing that is done, sharing's caring, isn't it? Yeah. The more that is done, the more best practice sharing that is done, and the more connectivity we have, the better. When we compete, we lose. It's win-lose. We need to look at win-win more often. We're not a very big country. If we look across the north, from Liverpool to Hull, it's a state in America. So we need to talk about economic areas better than small things. So it's sort of localization, global outreach, but local effect.
Any of the panel like to come in on that topic? Raoul, and then I'll come to...
Sorry, yeah, and just very briefly, I think there's also a question of the amount that local government has to do. This may be less true for combined authorities, but when you think of the burdens of social care delivery and things like that, that eats up so much of the budget and time. And if you want them to do more on local industrial strategy, economic growth, they have to do less of that or have more capacity. So there is also a balance of, it's not just about what do you decentralise, are there things you need to centralise or take off them as well to allow them to do more of the stuff that we might want them to do.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, and the point I was going to make is, with all of these things, partnership beats point-to-point solutions all the time. And we've seen right across the piece, nationally with the metro mayors and the regional growth partnerships, when that partnership works well, delivery improves and confidence grows, and the rest flows from that.
And the role then of business in collaborating, yeah?
Yeah. And there's a sort of chicken and egg problem as well, because the central government doesn't want to devolve too much power until it feels that there's the capacity in the regions for people to use it. But until they get the opportunity to have a go at driving the car and pulling the levers, then that capacity won't naturally build. So it's so it means central government is going to need to take a bit of a risk. And I quite like what Raoul said about taking on some of the things that that local government does, so that it's free to do other things more strategically.
So we're near the end. We've got a couple more questions here as well, so maybe we'll go reasonably quickly through these. So let me just find the first one here, sorry. There's been greater devolution of power, money and decision-making to regional and local level leaders. Has this been gathering the momentum you'd expect at the local level, do we think? Do people feel we're seeing the momentum at the local level? Do you want to comment on that?
I think so if you look across the country, there's probably currently a three-tier system. There are the mayors that have been around a while, although within those mayors, so the strategic mayoral authorities, some have got a little of more devolution than others. We then have regions that are about to get a mayor or have just got a mayor, and then we have regions that don't want a mayor at all. So that's quite a complicated sort of smorgasbord of stuff going on. I think if we look at where things are successful and there are mayors that have done a really great job because they've had a single settlement a lot longer and have had the vision to do that. And so Andy Burnham is a great example of that. I think that within West Yorkshire, we would like more devolution and we would like more control over the whole of that pot. That will allow us to do more of those great things. So yes, it's going further, but it's not going further equally across the country. I think that might be a problem.
So more to do and more to build the skills as well so that we can actually leverage that locally.
Yeah. But the partnership point is absolutely making sure that within the business side of that, the fingerprints of business are through that policy, and making sure that businesses know how to engage and that are listened to is a really important part of the work that we do in West Yorkshire.
So maybe we can just close, because I think we are coming near time, on what more do we think that we, and it's the businesses that are in this room and many of the organisations that have been referenced, the wealth fund, etc., here in the room, what more do we think that businesses can do? What role can we play? And I'm going to come to you first, Antony, and ask you, what role do you in BlackRock, what role do you feel we more of us could play in driving the growth agenda across the UK?
Well, I think we've got to help explain what it is that we can do and what role we as businesses can play. So we want to deliver returns for the people who are invested in us. So that means we've got to find opportunities to invest money in that can grow over time on behalf of people saving for pensions or whatever. And that means we've got to have a lot of investable opportunities. Now, there's been a lot of debate in recent years about the sources of investment, right? So we saw yesterday a move to reduce cash ISA limits, which we don't think will necessarily lead to more people investing. And we've seen a lot of talk about the pension sector, and pensions should be mandated to invest in the UK, etc. So there's been all this focus on supply. But actually, what businesses can do is demand capital. All right, and when we, because you need to have that investable opportunity to actually, attract capital. So rather than force or try and nudge or pressure people into investing, businesses need to invest. And the UK businesses have the lowest investment levels in the G7 and have done for a number of years. And when we look at across the board, in aggregate, we see that since around the year 2000, UK businesses have more or less been able to self-fund their investment requirements. This isn't the case for every single one. I'm talking about an aggregate level. And the ones that do want to finance, who do want to borrow money or get an investment, are finding it difficult to. But on a broad measure, on an aggregate level, these businesses in the UK are not demanding enough capital from stock markets and from other sources of investment as they are in, say, Sweden or Denmark or other comparable countries elsewhere. And why is that? Why don't they want to invest? Because it's only through that investment in innovative new procedures that you'll have productivity, and then the productivity can come to growth. So I think the basic answer to the question is what businesses can do more is invest, demand capital, then we can invest it, then we can give it to them, then they can invest it in innovation, and that will lead to productivity and growth. And that's the key thing. They've got to want capital because they want to invest it.
Thank you. Okay, and another perspective at the end?
I think certainly from my perspective and from an Aon perspective, where we talk to our clients, I think there is also a case for, and to Antony's point, a case for us to be a conduit to central government. There's a huge untapped resource of SMEs in the regions and across that don't feel that they have the voice or the power to be able to speak up and ask for those things. So I think for groups like Aon that work with clients on a day-to-day basis on their risks, and also for industry bodies like the City UK and others around the piece, it is to keep making that case and advocating loudly for what our clients are telling us in closed-door meetings they're really desperate for, but they don't have a way to do it. The voice of sort of regional and SMEs needs to get louder.
Thank you. And I think music to Mars's ear, I'm sure too. Raoul, do you want to finish on this?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just building on Antony's point a little bit, I think for businesses in times of uncertainty, we talked a lot about the lack of consistency, the geopolitical, geoeconomic uncertainty, but I think I would encourage businesses to be offensive as well as defensive. There is a lot of wait and see out there, and I understand that inclination. But actually, when we look from a BCG perspective at the companies that do well through these periods of uncertainty, it's those that do act, go through transformations, try and take the hard decisions, and make some offensive choices that build market share and build long-term success. So I know easier said than done, but yeah, just something I would build on and encourage.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think that's a great place for us to end. I think it's provocation for us to essentially to lean in. To take the opportunities. I think you set the scene earlier on that actually, although the outlook is not fantastic, it's not too bad. And here's an opportunity for us. It is those businesses. I think I've taken from this the importance of skill build as well, the importance of collaboration, the importance of using our voice. And I think from government, I think the ask from this panel is for consistency and to make sure we have a mission. Let's get back on the mission, I think is the message from the panel here, Leeds. Thank you, everybody, for your attention, and thank you to the whole of the panel.